Welcome to the Refs Roundtable, part of the Wrestling with the Future podcast family of shows. My name is Mike Messier. I'm proud to step up and host this show tonight. Of course, this show is named in the honor of Jeff the Ref Robinson, our good friend. He's no longer with us on this earthly realm, but he's with us in the heavens, so to speak. And the first guest that I'd like to bring on as the host of the show tonight, Nikita, and Nikita, correct me if I screw this up, brother. Breznikov. Did I get
that, Mike? Beautiful.
And the reason why I'm so I watched your movie today. The movie is titled
Brush with Danger.
I watched it on Amazon Prime, and I'm going to ask the audience if they want to check out Nikita's acting, Nikita Breznikov's acting. Check out Brush with Danger. It's a brother and sister story. Nikita plays kind of a good-natured police officer or private investigator.
No, detective. Yeah.
Detective, and it's a good movie. There's martial arts. It's a good story. And if people are looking to see Nikita as an actor, I want them to check that out. Brush with Danger. I saw it on Amazon Prime, but I'm sure there's many ways to see the movie, Nikita.
Yeah, they have the regular version available too on Amazon, the DVD, and you can do all that stuff. Now, to give you a quick background on that, Ken, the brother, he was actually a kickboxing champion in Indonesia. And
nice.
they really are into the martial arts. Taught me a lot over the years. Believe it or not, Livy, she don't look big, but I wouldn't mess with her. She's that good.
I enjoyed the movie. And on this episode of the Refs Roundtable, Nikita, I wanted to talk to you because you're a longtime wrestling fan like myself. You and I were kind of in the same area at different times. You saw a lot of shows at the Baltimore Civic Center, now known as the Baltimore Arena. I think it's now called the Royal Farms Arena.
Yeah.
I think you also went to the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland, quite a bit.
Absolutely.
And around the time you were watching, there was a transition, I believe in 1982, when
84,
okay. But the ownership changed from Vincent Kennedy McMahon Sr. to Vincent Kennedy McMahon Jr., which I'm not sure if it was 82 or 84, but in any event.
You're correct, but that was 83, right between the two.
Okay, so we're both wrong.
Yeah, the Jr. was taking over, and I could actually refer to May 16th, 1983, because you see him at the entrance to the back stage area, and he's watching what's going on. He's doesn't have a jacket on. He's just in the vest, and he's dressed nicely, but he's in the promoter mode. He's not doing the commentary anymore. Gorilla Monsoon took that over, and Vince was running everything. So yeah, it was right around July of 83.
And was that
May of 83.
You witnessed that at a house show or on TV taping that visually?
Yeah, you could see it on the TV taping, actually. Yeah.
Nice. And now we fast forward, what is it, 37 years later to 2020, and Dutch Mantel kind of stirred an uproar about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, with a tweet, good old-fashioned tweeting. Dirty Dutch, who's worked for the WWE as Zeb Coulter and Uncle Zeb over the years as a manager, a mouthpiece, did some great stuff with Jack Swagger, We the People. And but Dutch put out a tweet that got some people excited or curious. And the rumor that Dutch perpetrated was the WWE would be selling. And I think the names that he dropped were ESPN, which is owned by Disney. And I could be wrong, either Dutch or somebody else also threw Fox out there. And of course, WWE has been doing SmackDown on Friday nights on Fox TV. So the point is that in our United States world, which we pride ourselves on freedom of speech and freedom of expression and, different arts, there really is I think that's 6 or 8 major powerhouse entities, big corporations that own a lot of stuff. Yeah. And even if the things that we think we enjoy that are kind of, grunge rock or do it yourself or independent artist aesthetic a lot of that stuff is owned by a bigger company. I think of, if I'm not mistaken, Miramax Films in the 90s had like this edgy kind of vibe to it, but I could be wrong. I thought they were owned by Disney. I could be wrong on that,
I don't know.
um, but what I want to talk about tonight with you, Nikita, is hypothetical, hypothetical situation. If the WWE is to sell, um, what would be the change for both WWE sports entertainment and professional wrestling at large? And I do want to kind of, before we go too much further into the conversation, just so everybody knows, I'm talking hypothetical. I'm talking what if. I have no inside scoop beyond what everybody else does in Twitterville and Dave Meltzer Observer and all these wonderful sources that have the inside scoop, or they think they do. Not claiming to have any inside scoop, folks. This is just a fun conversation. We're a couple of creative guys here, Nikita and myself, and I think this little existential journey might be interesting fodder to discuss. So, and the reason why I brought up the previous change of ownership, Vince McMahon paying, I think he paid his father $1 million for WWF or WWF at the time, was because that was like an in-family transition, father to son. Um, People aren't thinking this is going to go down like this time. They're thinking it might be, Vince as still the primary owner to another major, huge company like an ESPN, and the whole idea of Shane McMahon or Stephanie McMahon and Triple H, her husband, inheriting this powerhouse of a sports entertainment pro wrestling company, it seems to be kind of put on a different level because people are guessing that a different company would buy. So, Nikita, what are your opening thoughts given all that?
Well, first of all, if it came from Dutch, it's got to be. He's a wild guy, but he's no baloney. He'll put it out there. He's got the balls to do that. So he'll make sure what he's saying, he can back it up. Now, will it happen? Well, after this XFL debacle, and I believe personally, again, no inside information, that was just a strategic move, like when you file bankruptcy. People used to hang their head and almost want to do suicide, but it's like, it's a maneuver. It's not the same connotation it used to have. So Vince is not a dumb guy. The XFL was never, ever going to chase the NFL out of the game, no more than some backwater indie promotion would chase Vince out of the game. It's just not going to happen. So was he preparing? I would say yes, because then I'll tell you why. For the amount that I know of the man and watched through the years, and he is my favorite announcer of all time, without a doubt.
Vince McMahon.
Vince McMahon. He did the best job. He could deliver it normal. He didn't get goofy and scream and holler like a carnival barker. He was great at it. But he would eat, sleep, and shit wrestling. He was the biggest fan there ever was. And he's got a big attitude and a big ego. And I really believe, I don't know his age, 70 something,
He's 72 or 74 now, yeah.
Okay. He knows he's starting to see, like, the lights are starting to dim. Even if he's here another 10 years, or who knows what else is going on. I said this a few times in private conversations. Vince is going to kill this because he created it. I didn't like it in 1984 when the big transition took place, like I wrote about in my book, if I may, When It Was Real. The day the music died, January 23rd, 1984. Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania begins. I'm not going to knock it, but it was different. Vince took it to the heights. Then he got beat down when everybody started to go to Turner's money. He held his ground and came back. He resurged in 98. It was the thing again. Monday Night Raw was it. And it's the longest running television show in history.
Right.
And actually professional wrestling is the longest running reality show when you think about it of all time.
That's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's the very truth. So Vince has got to know time is getting short. And I don't think he wanted to pass the baton. I think he wanted to burn it. And I think that's what you're going to see, because it's not going to be, if it doesn't have a McMahon hand in it, it will be completely different, without a doubt.
And that's where I want to go with this. If it doesn't have a McMahon hand, let's get hypothetical. What do you think a company, let's just use ESPN as an example, what would be the upside for them owning the WWE?
Well, the name itself. Most people, it's kind of like when WrestleMania tickets go on sale, they sell out quick. But these are not fans that watch every day or every night, every week even. They just go like the Super Bowl or the World Series. People are not really into baseball or football. Like I used to know box scores and averages and all that stuff. You know, these are casual fans only from name recognition alone. So there's a value to that, especially right now with the COVID thing going on. It's like just throw something out there to them. Boom, boom, boom. And WWE, that's the name that everybody, just like Hulk Hogan. If you said to somebody, who's the greatest wrestler of all time? They wouldn't say Bruno, unless it was my era. They will say Hulk Hogan. And he's been gone for how long off the face of the main scene? You know, some may say The Rock, but they, I think, more associate him with Hollywood. It was probably
Right.
going to be Hogan or Andre the Giant, which,
Maybe some would say Austin, but then you're veering more into wrestling fan territory.
yeah. So it's kind of like people, it's like a headline. You don't get the true story. You just, the headline jumps out at you, and then you got to read through it, and then it's like, this is bullshit. It's not what the hell they led me in with. But that name recognition, I think that money is there for whoever, ESPN, Fox, whoever wants to grab it.
I guess another upside I would look at is just filling those programming hours. And ESPN right now, I mean, I watch a show called First Take. It's Stephen A. Smith, Max Kellerman, female moderator Molly Queeram Rose. It's about sports. So for 2 months, they've debated about sports having fans in attendance. They've debated about Tom Brady going to Tampa Bay Buccaneers from the Patriots. They've debated endlessly about LeBron James and Michael Jordan, which one's better. And now they're doing like show reviews of the Michael Jordan doc. My point is, ESPN, even their talk shows are desperate for material. And they've got a UFC thing coming up this weekend from Jacksonville, Florida. I don't think there'll be fans allowed. But when ESPN is now looking at this pandemic and they're looking at the fact that they're kind of caught with their pants down, they're a sports programming network, and they have ESPN2, they have ESPN Plus, and they have nothing to show except reruns and sports talk shows about old material. That the WWE library of wrestling matches, that's a great score for them if the price is right, because then they've just tapped into endless hours of programming that they can package. They could have talking heads. They could have celebrities. I mean, now I'm doing their job for them, but they could have celebrities talk about their favorite pro wrestling match and then show the wrestling match. So my point is, for an ESPN type of thing, the upside is the programming, the filling those hours.
Well, you know, that's why we have so much backbiting and going for the throat on Facebook over politics, because these news programs have to fill these continuous hours and they can't rerun. Or they did for a while, but then when the first guy broke out and started to do 24-hour service, everybody had to fill in. So how do you fill these time slots? There's so much, like the chief used to say, gaga out there. And okay, that makes sense that one of these major sport networks would pick it up and say, hey, let's fill a time slot. You see TV shows over the years, it's like, who watches this garbage? But they're filling a slot. What are they going to put up there? You know, it used to be years ago, they would do 24 shows in a season, and then the summer would be reruns, and you'd watch another network that, when it was 3 networks, that you didn't see during the regular run, so you could catch up. And then come September, you get fresh material. But I'm going to say, with the sports, you need to be a little bit more precise, because sports purist is going to want to see, like you say, they're getting sick of the reruns. Not me. I'd rather sit down and watch the 1970 World Series rerun for the 20th time than I would see today's. What I just don't follow it today. But that's me. And they'll say, yeah, but you know the outcome. It's like, so what? I'm still enjoying watching that. Watching those, we didn't know at the time, Hall of Fame games. You know, it's
Right.
like, man, this is incredible. Just like with wrestling of the 70s. They were all Hall of Famers, future, but still, the quality is just unbelievable. Now, Vince himself used to do the same thing. When we talk about filler, when he would put out these DVDs, my God, how many times has the Bruno Superstar match been on a DVD? The one from April 30th, 1977, when Billy Graham wins the belt. I must have 10 copies of it on different brands.
Right.
You know, it's like, man, how many times are you going to show us this? Give us something we haven't seen. Superstar had a lot of title defenses, you know. Now, for a while there, when they had that 24/7 network,
Yep.
that was great. I was a subscriber because they were showing, they would pick every month. It would be like Killer Kowalski, Strongbow, Steele, somebody. And then they would show a lot of their matches. But then after a while, you were starting to see repetitive. It was the same stuff. And it's like, you're losing me now. But I still subscribe because they would slide in a nice surprise once in a while. But when they went to this network that they have on the computer,
Yes.
I stood with it for a while, but then it was like the older material was like you were trying to put a puzzle together with all of the pieces turned upside down. You would have a hard time. You couldn't just type in Bruno Sammartino and find it would be just jumbled. And you had to search, and it's like, I don't have time. No, I don't want to see ECW. I don't want to see today's material. And that was always there. Boom, 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 boom. The
Sure.
upcoming pay-per-view, this is that. It's like, man, the last thing they had me on, it was a great, what I call a dumping of their all-star wrestling shows from 78 to 80. That was beautiful. I subscribed.
Right.
I was watching it, man, I was so happy. And then after that, it was really starting to get tough to find things. So it was like searching in the dark with a match. It's like,
Trying to find new old stuff.
yes, good way of.
Well, Nikita, I want to venture forth and say, if hypothetically, if the WWE McMahons were to sell, whatever stock they have left, because apparently even before this XFL thing started, the story was that Vince sold a bunch of his WWE stock in order to finance the XFL. So that was a story that was going around. Just another story, I don't want to ignore it, is that apparently there's several lawsuits going on right now of WWE investors suing either WWE or Vince himself because they feel that they were misled or funds were misappropriated or some such thing involving the WWE and the XFL. WWE had some controversy attached to it the last couple of years with their shows in Saudi Arabia. I was very outspoken about those shows. I thought that doing shows in Saudi Arabia where the women weren't initially allowed to perform was sending a mixed message. They were promoting this women's evolution, Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch, Bayley, Sasha Banks, but yet when they go over to Saudi Arabia, they leave the women off the show. And beyond that, Sami Zayn, because of his Syrian heritage, was not welcome to be on those shows. And Aleister Black, because of his tattoo of a female dragon on his back, was not allowed to be on the shows. So I had moral issues with WWE. And I'm wondering if people like myself who, I don't watch with one eye open, so to speak. Like I emotionally am not as invested in WWE as I used to be, but I keep hoping that it turns around. And in certain times, such as when WrestleMania, 5 or 6 weeks ago was playing, I watched it because I want them to do well. I want the WWE to survive in some format to keep this thing called professional wrestling going. So I'm wondering if there might be a surge of interest of, they use the term lapsed fan. I think there was a podcast years ago, The Lapsed Fan. Will there be lapsed fans who maybe gave up after, CM Punk left the company, or they gave up, like when Hulk Hogan won the title, whatever it was that certain lapsed fans say, well, wrestling died when WCW went out of business, or whatever it is that certain fans have left. And even if they watch once in a while, or watch WrestleMania once a year, but their emotional attachment to pro wrestling has faltered a bit, would some of those fans give it a second chance or a third chance if the McMahons were to sell to other people?
Oh, absolutely. Just out of curiosity alone, you would attract that much. It's kind of like when Hogan won the belt. You brought in a whole new regime of fan. Okay,
Right.
they wanted to see, and you put it on MTV, and then our NBC's Saturday Night Main Event. It's like, wow, hey, this stuff is hitting the mainstream. This is not on your UHF channel anymore with the rabbit ears and the aluminum foil. It's like, hey, this is right in your face, NBC. So, yeah, I think it would. But I didn't know Vince had sold his shares. I didn't,
Not
because I
all of them,
oh,
just
not
not
all.
all, but
No, he would sell the controlling share without a doubt. No, he'd still maintain that. I know enough about stock and trading and things like that. I've dabbled in it, and that's eye opening that was done. So
Vince.
there's lawsuits. I didn't know that.
There are two separate stories. Vince sold some of his shares of WWE to finance the XFL, so he could liquidate his own money that was in WWE in order to put that money towards XFL. Now that the XFL has declared bankruptcy in 2020, after the coronavirus, and the truth is their ratings were falling every week before that anyway.
I'm sure.
So what people, apparently the story that got released was something to the effect of that there was like 3 or 4 law firms coming after either the WWE or the McMahons themselves for I think the terms were misleading information. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not I don't work for the Wall Street Journal, but I mean, those articles are online, so people can fact check whatever I'm saying. But my overall point is, at 72 or 74 years old, maybe Vince is just feeling to hell with it. And like you said, rather than pass the baton, he wants to cash in the baton.
Somebody posted that exact wording. Vince is in a to hell with it attitude
Right.
with everything. And you've seen a lot of people released recently. And these are some very good people that have been with the company a long time.
Jerry Briscoe was put on furlough. Yeah.
Yeah, it's eye opening. It's Howard Finkel just passed away, and God rest his soul. We love Howard.
Yes.
What a coincidence. At least Howard was spared all of that. But then you got to wonder what's going to happen to a guy like Darren Drozdov, who had his neck broken, and I know they've been taking care of him for a while. I recently saw a story about that, and I'm glad to see it. And it happened on their watch, so obviously they're locked into that. But what's going to happen to somebody like that? And you got more situations than we know. I'm sure Vince has probably got more lawsuits. I mean, it just goes with the territory. Nobody's ever going to be happy, especially with dealing with private contractors, which is what that is. And it's like somebody's going to feel like they didn't like me for this reason. She's going to say he didn't like me for that reason. And it just goes on. That's why I would never want to be in that position to own
Right.
or be any kind of a decision maker. This is a litigious society. Everybody's quick to pull the trigger on the lawsuit, win, lose, or draw. But the thing is, justice is neither swift nor cheap. You better have deep pockets. So good luck to it.
I just want to explain for the younger fans. Darren Drozdev was probably most famously known for his little cameo in Beyond the Mat documentary. But he was a WWF wrestler. He was, upper mid card talent, and he was wrestling D'Lo Brown, I believe, at a SmackDown taping. This match never aired on TV, and this was, I want to say, September of 1999. And it was kind of, sadly enough, 2 or 3 months after Owen Hart's death in the ring. And then you had this as another tragedy pretty soon after, just like I said, 3 or 4 months after. And basically, D'Lo was going to do a running power bomb on Draws. The two guys have both said it was an accident. Something happened where their bodies just shifted. It's just a really lousy accident. And Draws took the power bomb. He either was executed wrong or he took it wrong or some combination. And basically, he will never walk again because he was instantly. I think he was paraplegic or quadriplegic. And so the point Nikita's making is that that guy has been on the WWE payroll, I think, for over 20 years. I'm not sure exactly what he does for the company. Initially, he was writing some material for their WWF Raw magazine, but I don't think he does that anymore. But you're right. It's kind of like these people that the WWE has on their payroll as a favor, out of respect. Some of these Legends contracts, for instance, and even the WWE's policy of sending certain guys to rehab, drug rehab. They've paid the bill for many of their former talents to go to drug rehab. And the joke is that sometimes Hunter is, sending his old buddies to rehab. But will those policies, official or unofficial, continue if a company like ESPN, which is owned by Disney, they look at this payroll and they've got all these ex-wrestlers who don't longer do anything? Will that carry over? And I think the probable idea is that probably wouldn't.
No, I'm sure they would have an option, and I would imagine that would be declined. And to a little bit more elaboration on Draws, I mean, he was no small guy. He played for the
Right.
Denver Broncos, University of Maryland. I was with him just before that, July 22nd, Outlaws of Wrestling show in Atlantic City. He was just a beautiful person. Still is, but I mean, before that happened, complete accident. I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often. It happened to Bruno, you know.
Right.
He's like a gorilla. So he was able to sustain. It was a similar kind of a situation, his was a slam and, he just,
Wrestling Stan Hansen.
yes. And it was like, but Bruno came back in 2 months, count them, 2 months. And he was back in a ring. And it's like, that was unbelievable. But yeah, I doubt that they would want to take those liabilities on, but that could be part of the package. Who knows?
Yeah. Just to distinguish, it wasn't anything. Obviously, it wasn't Bruno was tougher or anything than Draws. It was just the nature of the accident was different, and I think that Draws being elevated, 6 feet above D'Lo's shoulders and then dropped the wrong way. And I think Draws recently was on one of the Dark Sides of the Ring, the Brawl for All episode, so we did get to see Draws in his home.
I saw a picture of him recently. Yeah, and look, this guy, his spirits are unbelievable. So, It's like, wow, his attitude is like, gee, he's remarkable.
So let's get back to this hypothetical what if Nikita scenario. Pro wrestling or not pro wrestling, but WWE in particular, to me, has been creatively stagnant for quite some time. And every once in a while, we'll see something like Daniel Bryan will make a heel or a babyface turn, and that'll get some emotion. Or he'll retire and then he'll come back. And there's certain key players. That Daniel Bryan's one of them. Becky Lynch, I think the way that I think they handled Becky Lynch was that they iced her heat. Like, she was getting a lot of attention. She was very organic in getting that attention. And it seemed like the WWE was afraid that she'd take off beyond their control. And they started putting her in the opening matches on a pay-per-view. They started having her apologize to Shane and to Stephanie and Triple H. They started doing things with her character that they didn't make her. They didn't squash her, but they didn't do her favors. And
see, Mike, this is going to tie into what we talked about earlier, content. But in this day and age, you have to have the content. And it's like, it's too much exposure. And just what you said, you can either turn face to heel. Who cares anymore? Champion, you've been champion 25 times. Who cares anymore? That doesn't have any bearing. So it's like, what do you do? How do you keep people interested? They're not. You know, we always talk about the 70s, the 80s, even some of the 90s, when people would probably want to bash your face in if you called it fake. Not just
Right.
say Dr. Schultz, but it was like, man, you go to a wrestling arena and start spouting that off, you're going to get punched in the face. I can guarantee that. You better keep your opinions outside. Nobody wants to hear them. So it's like, that was a different era, of course, because you had 1 hour of television and everything else took place in the arena. So that was great. You could really keep us chasing the carrot. That was nice. That was no problem. And then when we have the internet and you got all this content on television, how in the hell do you keep people interested? Nikolai used to say it. What they going to do next? Cut that guy head off? You know, it's like you're diving over tables and things are on fire in some place. It's like, oh my God, what a mess. How do you top that? Because then people want to see what's next. Okay, you
Well,
did that. You stood in front of a bus. Okay, that's great. Now who's next? And what is he going to do? Or what is she going to do? And it's like,
well, I think that one thing and that's kind of on the topic of what is wrong with WWE or where have they gone askew? And I guess my thought is hearing what you just said, and Nikita is a hardcore wrestling fan, you know, just as much as any of us, if not more. So my feeling is that a company like ESPN, who has ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN College, the ESPN Plus, you know, that they want subscribers to, and they want to have pay-per-views on that, and they've been doing that with UFC. But can you imagine if they suddenly ESPN on their roster had a beautiful Sasha Banks, well-spoken Sasha Banks, a beautiful Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair with her father, if they had all these good looking guys too. They had a Drew McIntyre, you know, 6'9", 6'10". I guess he's 7 feet tall. Drew McIntyre coming in, who's probably more articulate than any of the athletes they have on there now. So my point is that if the WWE and all these contracts were to carry over, the people that they still have under contract, the Drew McIntyres, the Seth Rollins, I'm not sure about Roman Reigns' status right now, but if you have these photogenic, good-looking, athletic people who can also talk, and a lot of pro athletes, let's be clear, a lot of them can't carry an interview. You know, for every athlete who can have a decent interview, there's probably 10 or 20 that can't. And you're kind of peppering your ESPN product in your shows. Like I said, Becky Lynch, like her or not, she's a very gorgeous woman, and Sasha Banks and so forth. So
and that was why you had the managers years ago, because they could do the talking. If you had somebody that was just and standing there, it's like, okay, let the little Albano Blassie or the Wizard do the talking, and they just stand back there and they look intimidating. You had great people like Morocco who could just go on. He didn't need anybody. Slaughter was great. So many others. Or somebody that was going to just talk like a Spiros Arion about what was coming up and how he liked to do what he was doing. So that was fine. But you're right. There are many people that get out there and it's the deer in the headlights. And now, okay, let the manager run with it. But today they don't have a lot of managers. I think what we're going to either see, there's a couple of scenarios. Whoever takes them over, if it happens. And again, we don't know. We're not
hypothetical.
Yeah, we're not dangling anything for anybody. We do not. But if it was to happen, you're going to have a transition, or it'll be a nightmare scenario where you got a lot of Johnny come latelys that say, "Oh, I know what to do. I'll take it over." And it's like, "Oh boy, this will really be silly." Or they'll just do it the right way, have a transition team. You know, let maybe the McMahon family that's running it now kind of get it going, or they'll keep them on. Maybe they'll put them on a payroll even. But if you just try to flip this and try to make it a whole different animal, make a giraffe out of a lion, it's going to be ridiculous.
Nikita, let's go for a few minutes into the past. Now, this show is Wrestling with the Future, the Refs Roundtable. So with that theme of the future, that's where we're having this hypothetical scenario. But I want to kind of explore the idea of, and I've been doing some research. There's a lot more research to do. But I mean, things like the Georgia Wrestling War of the 1970s, where you had Ray Gunkel was a promoter in Georgia of NWA wrestling. And apparently, after a match with my buddy Ox Baker, Ray passed away. And
Mhm.
so Ray had this beautiful, really gorgeous woman. Ann Gunkel was his young wife.
Yeah.
And apparently she thought, hey, I'm the widow. I should run this wrestling territory. And a lot of the boys, the wrestlers said, yeah, we're going to go with Ann. But apparently Bill Watts was somehow involved from what I saw today. Maybe I got the information wrong, but there was a wrestling war that lasted several years and at least 2 years before it could be worked out and they got things cleared up. And then the same Georgia area as a hotbed, eventually eight years later or so, you had Black Saturday, the WWF, Vince McMahon once again taking over the Saturday night WTBS show. And it just got me thinking about some of the history of different wrestling promotions coming and going, AWA, World Class. Nikita, what are your thoughts on some of the history of wrestling promotions that have come, gone, territory wars, promotional wars?
Well, back in the 70s, then they all worked together. Now, I can only speak of the East Coast, which is what I was associated with as a fan. I was just a punk kid back then. But we knew what we had. Madison Square Garden was Black Friday every month. That was the anchor of the company. So they had to, if they didn't come out in the black, like businesses do on Black Friday, then the whole situation was going to fail. But yet you had, and what people fail to understand, the championship wrestling show was always geared towards what was coming at the Garden. It's great if Phil Zacco in Baltimore and Philadelphia could play off of that, and he would. But they would have their own little things going on in Baltimore, like Bobo Brazil, when he carried Baltimore for the summer of 73. A lot of people didn't know what was going on because we didn't have television there, but we knew it. And then North Attleboro every Friday night, Jack Witchy's place, they would have their own little thing going on. Because in fact, from the Boston Garden, there was a battle royal March 30th of 73. Fred Blassie got into it, two heels now, with Buddy Wolf. And he busted Buddy Wolf open, threw him out, eliminated him from the battle royal. But they didn't have a way to follow that up. I guess schedules conflicted. But Witchies did a couple of weeks later. They had the match, Freddie Blassie against Buddy Wolf. And I guess people would be like, well, why are they wrestling? But you had to know a little bit of that history of what was going on. There were so many independent promotions within the WWF, but they all worked in concert with McMahon Sr., Phil Zacco, who was vice president, Monsoon, he was one of the chief operating officers. So there wasn't anybody trying to run rogue because they knew I got to survive too. It's kind of like a franchise today where people buy a McDonald's franchise or a Burger King. That's why when this thing about the minimum wage comes up and they say, oh, well, the corporations got billions. Yeah, but the poor sucker that it's like a mortgage that bought into that. He
Right.
doesn't. And he's got to pay corporate a certain percentage every month. He doesn't have that kind of money. So these guys, I guess I don't know the particulars. They probably had the same kind of situation where, hey, we're using WWF talent, even though it's my show. I'm sure some of it had to go back there. And they knew the importance of working together instead of trying to step out. Now, see, there was a local promoter named Dennis Carluzzo in New Jersey.
NWA, yeah.
Yeah, NWA, Dennis carried the brand for back in the 90s. He was doing great work. He was a good friend of mine. He was a brilliant wrestling mind. But other people, other independent promoters, instead of working with him, undercut him. They would say the show's canceled, or they would do whatever when the net was really starting to come to be, then post different messages, and it would affect the house.
This is like early 93, 94.
Well, this is actually later, I'd say.
Okay.
when I actually was involved with it and I saw things going on, it's like, you know what? If you guys work together, you're not going to beat McMahon, but you could all have a slice of the pie. You may not have two, but you'll have one slice. But no, they didn't want to do that. They were trying to cut Dennis's throat, stab him in the back, and then it was like, well, now everybody fails, and McMahon wins. So
You're talking about like 98, 99?
yes, exactly.
Now, Nikita, a couple of things. I want to backtrack a little bit. Um, you mentioned something that you may not have realized kind of blew my mind a little bit, because the way that you were talking about the Jack Witchy, and my buddy Steve Feinberg used to go to those Jack Witchy shows, and he's a Rhode Islander. He would drive up to Attleboro for those Jack Witchy shows, and the people in New England still talk about it. And whenever they do talk about it, Nikita, they always say that back when they were a wrestling fan, it was Bruno, Andre, Strongbow, Morales, and it's almost like they say the same 4 or 5 guys. It's always Bruno, Andre. You start mouthing along with someone saying it, but you were describing the WWF in a way that I'd never heard before, which was almost like a territory where different venues up and down the East Coast were doing kind of their own separate angles and promotions, or not promotions, but angles and storylines, like Blassie turning on the guy in the Battle Royal. Would you say it was Buddy Wolf? Yeah, and I never thought that WWF was ever like that, like a Wild Wild West, because when I started watching, it was like you were getting that weekly syndicated show, and then they were popping in the promos for your local arena. But at some point, I became aware that my local arena was more or less the same house show as Philadelphia, more or less the same thing as MSG or Boston. The same type of 5 or 6 matches, maybe with some of the matches were a little mixed up, but a lot of the stuff was the same. The way you were describing it, Nikita, was almost like the NWA, like where you had your World Class, your Mid Atlantic. Can you go into that for a minute, because that seemed to me that's something I never really heard, with the WWF being a collection of different little venues.
Well, now, see, in Baltimore, I bet you a lot of people don't know that the big cat Ernie Ladd had a feud with Professor Tanaka that was settled. And that started, it was a match with Morales and Tanaka, and Ernie Ladd got involved. And then Sonny King came out, Showboat Sonny King, and then there was a tag match the following month, and then Tanaka and Ladd, they mixed signals and they got into it. So then they had a match to settle everything. And it was like, yeah, that was really cool for us in Baltimore. But people outside of that area, they had no clue that was going on. Now, there were some nice magazines. The Ring Wrestling, or the Ring Wrestling magazine back then, was really good for reporting things like that. Legitimate stories with legitimate results. Once in a while, you could find those gems. But basically, you had to be there or you didn't know that was going on. And they would run like this day in 1978. For me, it's still May 6th. So it was Ken Patera was going to wrestle Backlund. Now, I didn't even know what was going on. We thought Patera, we were told, because they shot a quick promo for that day, wasn't behind the ring or in front of the ring with the ropes behind. It was a curtain. So they must have slapped this together quick. They said, well, there's been a shifting that has taken place between the managers, Blassie with Arion and Albano with Patera. And now we have Spiros Arion's going to wrestle Backlund tonight. And it was like, oh, they're trying to screw Backlund up with he's training for Patera. And it's like, it's all bullshit because Patera left the area. He got pissed off.
Right.
He came back for one more match in the Garden, but they get that payday, but that would satisfy that debt. But he was done, and we didn't know about it. But that night, instead, we got to see Arion against Backlund, and it was great, even though he came in expecting Patera against Backlund, and it was like, but we had that buildup as we went into the arena that night. But again, you didn't know what Boston had going on. Nobody knew what was going on in Philadelphia because we didn't have the net. And man, these small places like Gene Dargan, he was a promoter in Pennsylvania. I saw his name come up not long ago. People brought him up, and he in Steubenville, Ohio. That was kind of like the last stop before you crossed into the next territory. So Steubenville had their things going on, and again, you would have like Putski and Maivia teamed up a lot throughout the East Coast before Maivia had his heel turn. But you didn't really hear about that because it wasn't on television. Now, if you went to the arenas, which this night, again, Maivia and Putski teamed up against the Graham brothers, that was just like, wow, people were crazy for that. I mean, we love Putski, we love Maivia, and to see Superstar with his brother, that was just like, wow, because they didn't really do much with that and throughout the entire WWF. Because Superstar was in such demand. Still
was it Eddie Graham or Luke Graham? That was the
Luke,
brother.
Crazy Luke.
Crazy Luke. Okay.
And we were over for Crazy Luke because he would do that. We would holler, Crazy Luke, and he would mess his hair up and he'd go goofy, and then the face would take over on him. So he was over in Baltimore. Then when he teamed up with Billy Graham, it was like, wow, this is just a great team. But
was Eddie Graham
never
part of the brothers?
Never had him involved. He came along. He had a little bit of a spot in the 80s, I believe. Dr. Jerry came back shortly, but never in the 70s. The 60s, of course, but never the 70s. Not WWF anyway.
Nikita, it's interesting to me that your knowledge and of these territories, the Baltimore Landover, it's pretty profound, pretty deep. And one thing I remember that you and I might have overlapped a bit was in the Capitol Center. Special Delivery Jones was not a job guy all the time. In fact, he was a main event guy. And a couple of times, but he was a main event guy when he was tag teaming with Rocky Johnson. And they were called the Soul Patrol. And then later on, they would call on TV, Tony Atlas and Rocky Johnson, the Soul Patrol. And I always felt that SD Jones kind of got the short end of that stick somehow because I guess his physique was not as big as Tony's and Rocky's. So, but
well, now wait a minute, you're onto something there, Mike. But Jones and Atlas had a shot at Fuji and Saito in 1981, November 14th at the Spectrum. And Chief was actually pushing to get SD and Tony Atlas the belts. He thought they would be a great team together. And they loved each other, without a doubt. They got along famously. But, Vince had other ideas. My opinion, I think Pat Patterson had some influence into that decision. I think Pat brought Rocky in from the West Coast. Not saying anything against it because Rocky was a great talent, but we never had the exposure to Rocky Johnson until 1982. He had never been on the East Coast, at least in the 70s. But when he came in, it did look like a great team. Atlas and Johnson, it's like, two powerhouses. How can they go wrong? So I didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, but apparently it was. But we always did love SD Jones. We did. He was like the people's representative. He's out there, he's giving everything he's got, and at the end of the match he ends up on his back. It's like us, we're up there every day, and it's like, son of a bitch, we end up looking up at the lights, damn it.
And he was a wrestler who transported from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to Antigua in the West Indies, which I always found interesting that his hometown made a drastic change. And SD, I think, had two LJN action figures. One was the traditional red trunks, I'm here, I'm ready to get beat look, and one was the West Indies look. So it's interesting that certain guys of, I made a funny meme last night just to piss people off. This was a meme I put in a wrestling group called Old School Wrestling on Facebook. I said, it is politically incorrect to call preliminary wrestlers jobbers. The correct term is star builders. And I put this meme in a wrestling old school group just to see what would happen. And I got so many comments, so many ups, downs, people defending what I said. Of course, the term star builders, I just made it up. nobody in the wrestling business has ever said, "Oh, that guy's a great star builder." No one's ever said that. It doesn't even sound right. If anything, you call it a star maker. But it's just funny that if you mention the term jobbers as politically incorrect, it got a visceral reaction from people. People were quick to judge, quick to speak up.
The most prolific name I heard was enhancement talent.
Yeah. Yeah, people use that one a lot, which is fine. Carpenter, I kind of like, but I because the idea is that the carpenter builds the house, and then, but you must have seen guys like Johnny Rods and Baron Mikhail Sakula in his later years, and you
Yeah.
know, Johnny Rods to me, I was watching on one of these old house show tapes of WWF. Johnny Rods went in there with a guy, I think it was Steve King. Now, Steve King has the most platonic, Caucasian, boring name ever, but he was a Latino guy.
Yeah,
And
Panama City.
right.
His wife posted me on Facebook.
Oh,
And
yeah?
she really appreciates, and Johnny Rod's my amigo. I love Johnny Rods. He's a tough son of a bitch. And people say, well, what? Johnny Rod's never won a match. Well, you're wrong. He did win many matches, but his job was to enhance the talent. But he was the enforcer as well as the true test. They want to find out what somebody's got, put him in there with rods and see if they can survive or not. But Steve King's wife really appreciates his memory, that when people talk about him, when his name appears on a lot of the things that I post daily, and it's got nothing to do with the book. It's got to do with, I love it because my book doesn't have those kind of pictures in it, and there's clippings, but I stop at 1979. So I go on to 83, which is for me part of my love. But Steve King, yeah, he gave 100% when he'd get in there. And he was somebody we'd get behind. Joe Turco at the twilight of his career, the Continental Nobleman. We loved him to watch Joe Turco. And he wouldn't do much because he was an older guy. But he was very vocal. And he was like a comedian. But of course, that was like an opener. So you didn't want to go out there and take away from the main bouts. So you just go out there and warm up the crowd. That was great. Like Moose Monroe was another one. All Moose could do would be, whoa! We loved that shit. It was great.
There was a match with Johnny Rods in the opening match. And I swear to God, Nikita, I've never seen a guy wrestle both sides of the match before. This was kind of like if Bret Hart had to wrestle a broom. Johnny Rods was taking this guy, and he was, and it wouldn't be something that if I was in the arena that night or if I was watching this on TV as a kid, I would notice. But just listening to all the shoot interviews, watching all the wrestling stuff, doing ring announcing myself, and so forth, I could, at this advanced age of wrestling fandom, pick it up like Johnny was putting this opponent through the moves. Like even when the other guy was doing the move on Johnny, Johnny was expertly kind of manipulating this guy. And I was like, Johnny Rods he's not wrestling himself, but he's wrestling both sides of this match. And I was very impressed. We're coming up on the hour, and I do want to make the show about an hour long, Nikita. So we got about 4 minutes to talk, and I just think that it's an exciting. Let's face facts, folks. We want to encourage everybody, if you're going out and about, wear your masks or your neck gaiters or your bandanas across your mouth. And what people don't realize, just to change gears real quick, is the reason why I say that is because some of us might be out there as holders of this coronavirus, not even realizing it. And if you are covering your mouth and your nose, you're doing a public service for other people to not spread this thing. And I know that throughout the country and throughout the world, different places are allowing for more social interaction at this time. But what I want to, kind of publicly do is just encourage people, try to keep that as much as you can to a minimum, because this coronavirus, it's still killing people. A buddy of mine's in the hospital with this thing. I'm seeing people on Facebook every day saying their mom died, their aunt died. It's a serious deal, folks. So while we want to enjoy our freedoms again, just be respectful of the fact that the hospitals and the doctors and nurses in this country have to take care of people. So try to lessen the load. Get off the soapbox here and go back to wrestling, Nikita. Um, do you, I guess, 2-point question. Do you still watch current wrestling, or do you watch old school wrestling exclusively? Do you what's your kind of viewing plan, so to speak?
Old school exclusive. I have an
Okay.
extensive collection, and I'm definitely kept well entertained. I probably, if I tried to sit down and watch it all from end to end, I could not do it. It would take years. I go from 1970 to 1983. I've got an 84 collection too, because I did enjoy Nikolai and the Sheik's run. That was a great tag team. And Slaughter and the Sheik was just fantastic feud. So I could never leave those out. But I pretty much cut off at 83.
And you watch on VHS tape or DVD? What's your material?
DVD. They took me kicking and screaming back about 19, I'm going to say 93. I thought I would never switch because I had the extensive VHS collection. But then my wife convinced me. She said, this is the new medium. And I'm an old school television buff, like Batman, Combat,
Sure.
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. So I wanted to get those collections. And it's like, what are you going to have, 150 VHS tapes? And then I saw one day, it was a little expensive in the beginning, but it's like, man, you can get a whole season in this little box. That's neat. And then I was watching as I was transferring my VHS to DVD. It's a good thing I did, because I was starting to see those famous lines, and that meant the tape is starting to go. And it's like, oh man, this is good timing, and I tried not to watch them too much. I'm a crazy, like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. I'd have a backup to the backup to the backup. I still do with the DVDs. And it's like, man, but tape was tape, it was going to wear out. Not to mention, where the hell do you store all that stuff?
Well, I hear you. And is there, with your advanced collection, like for instance, Nikita, I thought, sometimes I think, oh, I've seen all the wrestling there is to see. I'm on Amazon Prime a couple of nights ago, and I find this Detroit wrestling,
Mm.
and Terry Funk is in there, like a clean shaven Terry Funk, and he's saying some pretty hardcore stuff. And they had some football player that was a legitimate NFL player that was there to wrestle. And I'm like, this is pretty wild stuff. And it's just interesting to me, and a friend of mine, I'll give him credit, Miguel Souza, back when I was in college, he said it was the wrestling geeks and the Star Wars nerds in the same room. And Miguel made a point to the Star Wars nerds. He said, you guys have got like 6 movies. Us wrestling fans have got endless, endless, endless material. And even now, the Star Wars universe, so to speak, has maybe 9 feature films, maybe 3 or 4 animations, Christmas special, and fan fiction and all that. But if you want to compare Star Trek, Star Wars, any type of niche genre to wrestling, there's no question that maybe not quality sometimes, but quantity, we get them beat.
Oh yeah, we got plenty to keep us happy. And I'll tell you, I've invaded so many worlds throughout my years. Whether I'm talking to a lawyer or a doctor, when they hear wrestling, their eyes light up and they're in another world. They start talking about their memories of pro wrestling, and it takes off. And it's like, man, even in acting, you meet famous people like Adam West. He loved Nikolai, and I got to know Adam West because of Nikolai over the years, but he loved wrestling. He was a cool guy about it. So many people through the years I think I'm going to say, I hate to say never, or use the term everybody, because I came from a world with the police department where you had to prove it in court or shut up. But I'd say 98% of people have wrestling memories, males at least. Definitely males.
I'd go along with that. Well, Nikita, Breznikov, if I
Yes,
said that properly
you got it.
again. The movie again, is it Brush of Danger?
Brush with Danger.
Brush
Yes,
with Danger.
with Danger.
And I want to encourage people, and your book, When It Was Real.
When It Was Real. Yes.
And
Listen, I'm on Cameo too, and I just posted. Here's the When It Was Real, and I do a Cameo. You have the person do a greeting. It's only like 30 seconds or a minute. I said, for Mother's Day, I'll do whatever you want. I say, if you love your mother, you hate your mother, whatever message you want to give to her, I'll do it.
well, Nikita, I appreciate you being here, buddy.
Thank you, sir.
And people, check it out. Thanks for watching the Refs Roundtable for the Wrestling with the Future podcast family. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. We have many other content here on the YouTube channel, Wrestling with the Future. I've uploaded my interview with Vinny Paz, the 50-win boxer, who was the referee for WrestleMania's 15's Butterbean versus Bart Gunn. We've got my movie Disregard the Vampire, Mike Messier documentary. We've got my interview with the Sandman. Most importantly, we have the new Magnum TA interview with psychic medium Angelo, Tombstone Jesus, Dan the Man, Sebastiano, and myself. And we've got plenty of Nikita's interviews on the show on the YouTube channel as well. So even if you listen to us on Podbean, or Apple Podcasts, make sure you come over to YouTube and give us a like and a subscribe. And we also have the Wrestling with the Future T-shirts in case anybody wants one. We'd be proud to have you have your chest in our T-shirt, so to speak. Okay, Nikita, thank you so much, buddy.
Just be done, you brother.
Bye.